Welcome to my channel. Please support my channel with subscribe, like, and share. Thank you. The autumn air in Portland carried that soft chill that always felt like a whisper from the past. Warm memories wrapped in the crispness of falling leaves. Amelia's car rolled slowly up the narrow lane, leading to her uncle's cabin. Tucked neatly between tall pine trees and a silver-blue lake, she hadn't been there in years. Not since her parents' divorce split the family apart. She told herself this was just a quick visit, a short stop before her next photography trip up north, but deep inside, she wasn't sure what she was running from, or maybe, who she was running toward. Uncle Henry had always been her quiet favorite, gentle, patient, and kind. He wasn't really her uncle by blood, just her father's lifelong friend who'd been around since she was little. But family was never about names. It was about warmth, and Henry had always been warmth. When she parked the car, she saw him standing at the porch, that familiar smile softening the hard lines of age. His hair was streaked with silver now, and his eyes, still ocean blue, carried the same calm strength she remembered. "Amelia," he said, voice low and gravelly but warm. "You made it?" His tone wrapped around her like the smell of pine and old books, comforting, grounding. She smiled, tucking a strand of her auburn hair behind her ear. "I told you I'd visit. Didn't expect the weather to roll out the red carpet." Though she joked, glancing up at the sky splashed with late sunlight. Henry chuckled, stepping closer. "You always bring light with you, kiddo." The word kiddo made her heart twist a little. It felt both endearing and strangely distant. She wasn't a kid anymore. She was 26 now, grown, independent, a woman who'd seen the world through a camera lens. Yet something about being here, in this wooden cabin filled with the scent of cedar and old coffee, made her feel like the years had folded into one. Inside, the fireplace flickered softly, the kind of orange glow that could make silence feel alive. Photos lined the mantel: Henry's old dog, Amelia as a child with missing teeth, and her father smiling beside a lake years ago. "It's strange," she murmured, tracing a finger over the frame. "Time passes, but these pictures stay the same." Henry's eyes lingered on her longer than she noticed. "That's why I never took them down," he said. "Some moments deserve to stay." For a second, their eyes met, and something unspoken hung in the air. Not improper, not wrong, just deep, like the stillness before a storm that never comes. He broke the gaze first, pouring her a cup of tea. "So," he said, smiling faintly, "still chasing sunsets and stories with that camera of yours?" Amelia laughed softly, easing into the chair by the fire. "Always. But sometimes, it feels like the world's colors fade when you see too much of them." "That's because you're looking for the kind of beauty you can't capture," he said. The words hit her somewhere deep. Henry always had that way, saying simple things that carried more truth than poetry. They talked for hours. About everything and nothing. About how the town had changed. About how her mother still sent Christmas cards. About how the world felt faster, now, noisier. But under it all, there was a quiet thread of something else, something almost electric. When the power flickered and the room dimmed to just firelight, Amelia felt her pulse quicken. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the glow reflecting off his face. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, not like a child, but like someone who had grown up while he wasn't watching. She stood to warm her hands near the fire, and he came up beside her, close enough that she could feel the faint warmth of his breath near her neck. It wasn't intentional, at least, she told herself that, but the air between them shifted, like a string pulled tight. Her voice trembled softly. "You still keep the place just like before." "Some things shouldn't change," he said quietly, and then silence. The kind that hums. For a heartbeat, Amelia felt everything: the closeness, the memories, the ache of years spent apart. It wasn't about desire. It was about connection. About two souls that had drifted through time only to meet again in the same soft place. Her heart raced. She took a step back, smiling nervously. "I should probably unpack," she said, her tone light but her mind spinning. Henry nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Of course. Guest room's just down the hall." As she walked away, she felt his eyes linger, not with lust, but with something deeper, something like longing mixed with restraint in her room. She unpacked her small suitcase, trying to calm the storm that had started quietly inside her. The firelight from the living room danced against the wooden floorboards, casting long shadows that looked almost alive. Amelia sat on the bed, staring out the window at the lake. The moon rippled across the water, and she whispered to herself, this was supposed to be just a visit. But somewhere deep inside, she already knew it wouldn't be. The next morning came soft and golden. The cabin was wrapped in silence except for the low crackle of the fire Henry had started before sunrise. The air smelled of pine wood and cinnamon comforting, yet charged with the memory of last night's quiet tension. Amelia lay awake for a while before getting up. The echoes of their conversation still played in her mind, the laughter, the glances, that single moment when the world had gone still between them. It wasn't wrong, she told herself again. It was just a feeling. Feelings could be confusing. Feelings didn't always have to mean something. When she stepped out into the living room, Henry was already at the kitchen counter, wearing a worn flannel shirt and pouring coffee into 2 mugs. Morning light fell across his face, making the silver in his beard glow faintly. "Morning," he said with a soft grin. "Sleep okay?" She nodded. "I did. The fire helped. It's quieter here than I remember." "Quieter's good," he replied, sliding a mug toward her. "Makes you listen to yourself." Amelia smiled, though something about those words made her chest tighten. "Maybe that's what scares me." Henry looked up, curious. "What do you mean?" She took a sip of coffee before answering. "When things get too quiet, you start hearing everything you've been ignoring." His expression softened. "Maybe that's why you came here." The words landed heavy, truthful. She wanted to say no, to brush it off as coincidence, but deep down she knew it wasn't. Something about this place, about him, had always been her refuge. They spent the day walking along the lake, the leaves crunching under their boots. Henry showed her the small dock he'd rebuilt, the shed he was turning into a workshop, and the spot where the family used to fish in summers. The air was crisp, and the water shimmered like glass. At one point, Amelia stopped to take photos, the sunlight breaking through branches, the reflection of the trees in the water. Henry standing near the dock with his hands in his pockets. She caught that moment through her lens, and her heart skipped. When he turned toward her, their eyes met again, just like last night. And again, the air changed. "You still look at things like they're miracles," he said quietly. She smiled faintly. "Maybe they are." For a moment, the world felt impossibly still, the wind, the water, even time itself. Amelia lowered her camera, realizing she was holding her breath. Henry stepped closer, his voice low but calm. "You've grown into something remarkable, Amelia." Her pulse raced. "Don't say that," she whispered, not because she didn't want to hear it, but because it made her feel too much. He smiled, faint but sad. "It's just the truth." They stood there for what felt like forever, no words. Just that quiet rhythm between 2 people who didn't know how to step forward or back. By the time the sun began to set, the lake had turned to gold, and they walked back in silence. The cabin glowed with evening light, the fire waiting to be lit again, over dinner. Henry spoke about his late wife, how he still heard her laughter sometimes when the wind came through the trees. Amelia listened, her chest aching. Loss had shaped him, softened him, and maybe that was what drew her in, the way he carried love, even in the quiet. When she reached for his hand to comfort him, his fingers brushed hers lightly. The warmth of that touch sent a shiver through her, not of fear, but recognition. Something deep, human, real. "Thank you," he said softly, his thumb brushing over her knuckles before he let go. That night, as Amelia stood by the window in her room, she could hear him downstairs, the faint sound of his guitar slap, broken notes echoing through the walls. She closed her eyes, letting the melody wrap around her like a story that was still being written. The sound of rain began to fall, soft and steady. She lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts tangled between past and present, between innocence and longing. She didn't know where this connection would lead, or if it should lead anywhere at all. But she knew one thing for certain. This visit had already changed something inside her, somewhere downstairs. The guitar went silent. Then, for a moment, she thought she heard her name, barely a whisper carried by the firelight and rain. She wasn't sure if she imagined it, but it made her heart race all the same. The rain had been falling all night, steady, whispering, wrapping the cabin in a rhythm that made everything else feel far away. The lake outside shimmered under the gray morning light, and the scent of wet earth filled the air. Amelia woke slowly, the faint sound of the guitar still echoing in her memory. She lay there for a moment, listening to the rain against the roof, trying to steady the pulse that had followed her into her dreams. When she finally went downstairs, Henry was at the window, a mug of coffee in his hand. His gaze was distant, his reflection soft in the fogged glass. "Morning," she said, voice hushed as though she might disturb the quiet. He turned, smiling gently. "You sleep through the storm?" "Barely," she said, rubbing her arms. It felt like the rain was talking. Henry chuckled softly. "It does that here. The world gets quieter, and you start hearing things that matter. Amelia walked closer, drawn by his calmness. You always say things that sound like poems, she said, trying to hide the way her chest ached. Maybe that's what getting old does, he replied, eyes glinting. You start hearing life as music instead of noise. Their eyes met, and for a moment, everything outside the window disappeared. The storm became a kind of background song to the stillness between them. He poured her a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. The table was small, old, the kind that carried stories in its scratches. Do you ever get lonely here? She asked quietly. Henry hesitated, then nodded. Sometimes, but loneliness isn't always bad. It makes you feel, reminds you you're still alive. She looked at him, really looked at the hands that had built this place, the eyes that had seen so many years come and go. And she realized she wasn't looking at an uncle. She was looking at a man who had lived, lost, and still carried a kind of warmth most people spent their lives searching for. Her chest tightened. You make it sound almost peaceful, she said. He smiled. It can be until someone walks in and changes the air. The words hung there, heavy and true. Amelia didn't reply. She couldn't. Later that afternoon, the rain grew heavier, the sound filling every corner of the cabin. The two of them sat by the fire again, Amelia, sketching quietly, Henry repairing an old radio. The soft hum of the storm made it all feel unreal, like time had folded itself into this one long, endless day. Every once in a while, their eyes met, just a glance, a flicker, and then they'd look away. But those glances said more than words ever could. At one point, when a flash of thunder shook the windows, Amelia flinched slightly. Henry looked up, his voice calm and steady. You okay? She nodded, smiling nervously. Never liked storms. Without thinking, he reached over and rested his hand over hers. Warm, gentle, reassuring. The room fell silent again, except for the rain. His hand stayed there, not moving, not demanding anything, just being. That simple touch sent a quiet tremor through her heart. Henry, she whispered, unsure what she was even going to say next. But he spoke first, voice low and rough around the edges. Amelia, maybe this visit came at the right time. For both of us. Her breath caught. What do you mean? He shook his head slightly. Sometimes life gives you moments that feel wrong at first glance, but right in the soul. You don't have to explain them. You just feel them. Her heart pounded. The fire cracked softly. The rain slowed to a rhythm that felt almost like breathing. She wanted to speak, to untangle the emotions swirling inside her. But words felt too small. Instead, she whispered, I think I understand. Outside, the rain began to fade. The world washed clean and quiet again. Henry stood, poked the fire gently, then turned to her with a small, unreadable smile. Come on, he said. Let's take a walk before the light disappears. Amelia hesitated, then nodded. She followed him out to the porch, where the air was cool and damp. The scent of pine sharp and alive. As they stepped out into the soft mist, she glanced at him, calm, with that quiet strength that always seemed to steady her. And somewhere deep inside, she realized the truth. This wasn't just a visit anymore. It was a turning point, the kind you don't see coming until you're standing right in it. The rain had stopped by late afternoon, leaving the world shining and quiet. The lake glimmered like glass. The sky stretched wide and pale above the pines. Henry and Amelia walked along the narrow path behind the cabin, their boots brushing through damp leaves. Neither spoke much. They didn't have to. Sometimes, silence was the closest thing to understanding. Every so often, Amelia caught herself stealing small glances at him, at the way his shoulders carried years with ease, at the calm rhythm of his steps. He felt like stability in a world that had spun too fast. Henry stopped at the edge of the lake and looked out over the water. You used to run down here every morning when you were little, he said, smiling faintly. You'd try to catch the ducks before breakfast. Amelia laughed softly. I remember. You used to pretend to chase them with me, but you'd stop after a minute and say, let them be free, kiddo. I still believe that, he said. Freedom's everything. But sometimes, we run from things that are meant to stay. His tone changed, slightly gentle, but thoughtful. The words lingered in her chest. She turned to face him. You think I've been running? He looked at her for a long moment. I think you've been searching. There's a difference. Something in his voice cracked open the part of her she'd been trying to keep quiet. She looked down, tracing a circle in the damp earth with her boot. Sometimes it feels like no one really sees me anymore. They just see the camera, the travels, the posts. Not the person underneath. Henry stepped closer, slow, careful. I see you. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything she hadn't said aloud. Her throat tightened. She didn't know whether to smile or cry. The wind moved through the trees, rustling like an answer neither of them could give. After a while, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair away from her face, so gently it almost felt like a memory. Amelia, he whispered, you don't have to chase the world to find what matters. Sometimes, it's right in front of you. Her heart fluttered, and for a heartbeat, she forgot how to breathe. But before she could speak, a sound broke the stillness, the faint vibration of her phone. She blinked, stepping back. The name flashing across the screen made her chest tighten. Evan. She turned away, answering softly. Hey. It was her ex-boyfriend, the one she hadn't spoken to in months. The conversation was brief, polite, but distant. When she hung up, the air around her felt heavier somehow. Henry didn't ask, but his eyes said enough. Just someone from before, she said, forcing a smile. He nodded slowly. And are they someone you want in your after? Amelia looked at him, the corners of her lips trembling. I don't know. They walked back toward the cabin, both quiet. Inside, the fire was still burning, its glow softer now. Amelia sat by the window, watching the last light fade beyond the trees. Henry poured 2 glasses of wine, setting one near her. To stillness, he said. She raised her glass. And to finding what we didn't know we were looking for. Their glasses touched softly, a quiet clink that echoed in the still cabin. The conversation drifted, then stories. Laughter, moments that stitched the evening together, but underneath it all, something unspoken pulsed quietly, warm, confusing, and deeply human. When she finally stood to head to her room, Henry's hand brushed hers again, just a moment, just enough to feel the spark. Neither could deny any more. She turned at the doorway, meeting his gaze one last time. Good night, Henry. His eyes softened. Good night, Amelia. She went upstairs, heart racing, not from what had happened, but from what hadn't, and as she stood by her window, watching the moonlight touch the lake, one truth became clear in her mind. Whatever was growing between them wasn't a mistake. It was a connection, gentle, honest, and far deeper than either of them had expected. But she also knew something had to change soon. Because no matter how right it felt, the world outside that cabin would never understand it, and tomorrow, she would have to decide what to do about it. Morning came bright and cold. The storm had rinsed the world clean, and sunlight poured through the tall windows, catching every speck of dust like floating gold. Amelia woke to the sound of quiet movement downstairs. The smell of coffee and baked bread drifted up the staircase. For a long moment she simply sat there, wrapped in the quilt, trying to hold on to the stillness that had filled the cabin for days. Something had shifted inside her. She could feel it, like the pause between heartbeats when you realize a chapter is ending. When she came down, Henry was setting 2 plates on the table. He looked up, smiling, and for the first time in days the air between them felt fragile, uncertain. You're leaving today, he said softly. It wasn't a question. She nodded. I should get back to work. There's a new project in Seattle. He pulled out a chair for her. The world keeps calling you. Amelia sat, studying his face. You always said we shouldn't run from what feels right. But maybe we shouldn't hold it too tightly either. Henry smiled sadly. I guess that's the hardest part, knowing when to keep something, and when to let it rest in memory. They ate quietly, the sound of forks and the faint hum of the radio filling the space that words couldn't. When the dishes were cleared, he walked her to the porch. The lake glittered in the distance, the trees whispering in the wind. Amelia looked out over the water. Do you ever wish things could have been different? Henry took a slow breath. Sometimes, but then I think maybe things happen just as they're meant to. You came when the silence was getting too heavy. You reminded me what warmth felt like. She felt tears rising but didn't fight them. You did the same for me. For a long moment they simply stood there, side by side, watching the light play on the surface of the lake. Then Henry turned to her, his eyes full of that quiet steadiness she would never forget. Promise me one thing, he said. She met his gaze. What's that? Keep seeing the world the way you do, like it's worth looking at twice. Her smile trembled. I will. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch light and sure. It was the same gesture as before, yet it felt different. No confusion. Just gratitude, affection, and peace. Amelia stepped closer, wrapping her arms around him. It wasn't a romantic embrace anymore. It was something fuller, a kind of love that had grown beyond longing, a connection between two souls who had found what they needed in each other. Understanding. Thank you. She whispered against his shoulder. He held her a little tighter before letting go. Drive safe, kiddo. That word kiddo no longer stung. It felt like closure as she walked to her car. The wind stirred through the trees, scattering a few golden leaves across the path. She looked back once, saw him standing there on the porch, framed by sunlight. Their eyes met one last time, and everything they hadn't said was right. They're simple, real, eternal. When she drove away, the road stretched open before her, the sky wide and blue. She turned on the radio, the soft hum of a love song filling the air. Amelia smiled through quiet tears. It hadn't been just a visit. It had been a rediscovery of what it meant to feel deeply, bravely, and without shame. And somewhere behind her, in that cabin by the lake, a man she once called uncle stood by the water, whispering a thank you to the wind for the girl who had brought light back into his quiet world. The end.